years ago now, when I was at school, I've got to that stage in life where you don't want to actually sit down and work out how many years ago that was. But when I was at school, PE was not my favourite subject. I think something that people love or they don't. And I can quite confidently say I wasn't then, don't think I ever will be, very good at team sports. And I don't know quite how it worked out in your school, if this still happens in school now. But it used to be that two people would be chosen as the kind of team captains for the sports lesson, often people who were good. And they'd then get to choose their teams. I don't blame that even when my friends were those team captains that they didn't choose me. I wouldn't have chosen myself to be on that sporting team. But even though I didn't love games, there's something about being part of a team. When you're working together, you bring your gift in, however limited mine might have been, but you bring it and you work together towards something. But I think there's also something as well that as we kind of continue in life, as we get older, that often life becomes more individualistic. And actually, it's interesting if you look things up on the internet, that often England is known as being a very individualistic country, that we celebrate things like self-achievement, that we see it, that the most important thing we do is to look after ourselves and our immediate family, that comes way often above contributing towards society, that we value things like self-reliance. And yet also interestingly, slightly depressingly, that often when reports are there, England doesn't come very high in countries where people kind of flourish. That often it talks about our children and the younger generations. That though we used to, I don't even know if we would still on this, kind of score high on financial side, that kind of security, and I think even that's changed. But when it comes to things like relationships and meaning of life, we don't score particularly well, which often then means that people don't flourish. And that makes sense, because actually I believe that we're created to be in relationship. We're created to have meaning to our lives. And I think if we're, because that is so much of what our culture can be about, if we're not careful, that can then overflow into church and church life as well. At the moment in Werbs, we're on week 2 of a 4-week sermon series, and we're thinking about the presence of God. In the Bible, right throughout Scripture, we see altars being these places where people came, and they would build these altars, but it would be a place, it would represent encounter with God. It would represent these moments where we dedicate our lives again and where we surrender. And as followers of Jesus, though we're not going to literally leave today, unless you really want to, and build an altar, we do want to, within our lives, be building in these rhythms, these places, where we can help others encounter God, where we can come again and dedicate our lives and surrender. And so last week, Dan kicked us off, and he talked about the presence of God. You're talking about our hearts. We're going to look at how do we do this? How do we build these rhythms in future weeks, in our homes and across the city? But today we're thinking about Werbs. How do we make Werbs? Or, I don't know if make's quite the right word. How do we usher in here God's presence and live out his purposes? Werbs is called to be this home where people encounter Jesus, where it's all about Jesus, where together we reflect God's heart to the rest of the world. We're called to reflect out his heart, but we carry God's presence and his purposes. We do it together. It's not about us as individuals. It's about us doing it together. And so in a moment, we're going to look at this chapter, or part of a chapter, from the book of 1 Peter. And the book of Peter was written almost certainly by Peter, strangely enough. And he was writing to a group of Christians who'd been scattered. And they were scattered and living in different places because of persecution. So he's writing to this group of Christians where things are tough. And he's encouraging them to keep on living, to keep on doing things Jesus' way, to persevere in faith. So If you've got Bibles, you might have it on your phones, you might have an actual paper Bible, or if not, it's going to come up on the screens. But if you can, get it in front of you, so as I go through it, you can kind of look back and see what I'm saying. But 1 Peter chapter 2, starting at verse 4, says to this: "As you come to him, the living stone, rejected by humans, but chosen by God and precious to him, you also, like living stones, are being built into a spiritual house, to be a holy priesthood, offering spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. For in Scripture it says, 'See, I lay a stone in Zion, a chosen and precious cornerstone, and the one who trusts in him will never be put to shame.' Now to you who believe, this stone is precious. But to those who do not believe, the stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone, and a stone that causes people to stumble, and a rock that makes them fall. They stumble because they disobey the message, which is also what they were destined for. But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy." So firstly, as we are to build this spiritual house where we reflect God's heart to the world, firstly, it's all about Jesus. It's all about Jesus. Our vision statement, right in the middle bit, it says, which is Christ-centered. That is who we're about. Those first verses in Peter, it says, "As you come to him, the living stone being Jesus." But Peter doesn't just say the stone, he says the living stone, where he's emphasizing his resurrection. It's interesting, it talks, doesn't it, about how people have rejected Jesus and how we killed him. But so Peter emphasizes, no, but Jesus is risen. Jesus is alive. Jesus is the source of life. It's all about him. And this is who the church is, not just Werbs, but the church across the globe. It's what distinguishes us from other communities, from other groups, that we're followers of Jesus. You don't need to be an expert builder, which I'm not, along with sports, but we all know, don't we, that the foundations on which we build are all important. If we want a building to stand firm, to be strong, it has to be built on the right foundation. And Jesus is the firm foundation on which we build our own lives, but also he is who Werbs is built on. Werbs shouldn't be built on personalities. It's not about the leaders. It's not about our preferences or your preferences. We're to build on Jesus. He is the one name we're to lift high here. Verse 6 says, "See, I lay a stone in Zion, a chosen and precious cornerstone." The cornerstone is something of great importance on which everything else depends. And Jesus is the one that we want everything built on here. He is the one on who we want to depend. Our foundation matters. As a Christ-centered community, we need to be rooted in his teachings, his love, and following his ways. So firstly, it's all about Jesus. Secondly, we're called to belong, not just believe. We're called to belong, not just believe. Verse 9 says, "But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession." All those descriptions that Peter uses, they're all about us being in relationship with one another. The biblical idea was not for this individualism, but that we were to belong to one another. It goes against our culture. We don't kind of define ourselves as individuals anymore, but instead we're God's people. We're part of the family of God. Everyone who's a follower of Jesus is called to be part of a church. It's not some optional add-on for those who think it'll be a good thing or a fun thing to do. We're all called to be part of a church. Verse 5 goes on to say, you also, that's all of us, and those of you watching online, you also, like living stones, are be built into spiritual houses. God doesn't call us to be an isolated pebble. You are not just an isolated pebble. But as we come to Jesus, we become living stones that is to be built into this house. Because the thing is, you can't build something by just having lots of separate stones. It's not about us just being a stone and doing what a stone does, whatever that is, but we're called to be built together. But to be built together, when you want those stones to be built into a building, they have to be in close proximity to each other. It's no good just having all these stones all over the place. It means moving away from being individuals and being part of a family. Staying isolated in many ways is easy. You don't have to do anything. If you don't do anything, you'll be isolated. But actually, being part of something, it takes effort, it takes time, it takes investment and commitment. It means sometimes surrendering your own desires and wishes to be part of something bigger. The difference between attending a church and belonging to a church is commitment. It's as we commit and invest that we begin to belong. It says this in Hebrews 10. And let us consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. The Bible calls us to meet together regularly. It's why at the end of COVID, we didn't say, you know what, actually, it's quite good watching church in our pajamas. It's quite good doing it on the sofa, but for me, it'd be a Diet Coke in hand, the dog next to me. But instead, actually, we were desperate to get back together because there's something powerful of us being here in person. And I think, we encourage us to meet together on Sundays in small groups, that we can encourage one another on so we can have each other's backs. I think the challenge for us today, if I'm honest, is that it kind of can feel easier than ever to have our own walk with Jesus and not be part of a community. The reality is that this morning, you could stay at home and find a more gifted, experienced preacher than me and listen to that. You could, there's books out there, there's podcasts, there's so much good resources. And I'm not saying don't do that. That is brilliant when we're investing in our own walk with Jesus. But they were never meant to replace being part of a church. Sometimes as well, it can be so easy now that we live stream services to think, well, I'll watch it from home or I'll squeeze it into 2 work meetings. But that, again, doesn't replace being together. I do just want to say, though, I am so aware, and there might be people watching right now, where you would love to be here in church, but perhaps health reasons or other reasons just don't make that possible. And I know the pain of when you can't, perhaps in that way, be part of a community when you want to. So we are praying for those of you who that is. But where we can meet together, it's a good thing to do. Sometimes I have conversations and people often obviously ask what you do, and you say you're a church leader, and then people say, I'm a Christian, but I don't go to church. I don't need that because Jesus and me are doing great. But the problem is that Jesus calls us as his followers to be part of something bigger than just us. Or people might say, I'm not really a people person. But again, we're called to love others. And so actually, if you don't love others, then come to church and start practicing doing it, because we're called to love real people, not ideal people. So secondly, we're called to belong, not just believe. And then thirdly, everyone has a place and a part to play. We all have a place and a part to play. Verse 5 says, you also, like living stones, have been built into a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood, offering spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. In the Old Testament, only a few were chosen to be priests. But now all believers are part of a holy priesthood. And I believe as a church leader that actually my job is to serve, to encourage the priestly ministry of the whole church. We all have a part to play to grow God's kingdom. There's no hierarchy in God's eyes. We're all equal. And thankfully, it's not like sitting there waiting to see if you're going to be chosen to be part of the sports team. You don't come to church on a Sunday and like, well, who's going to be chosen this week to play for God? Who gets to grow his kingdom? When you're a follower of Jesus, we're all invited to play our part to grow his kingdom. And we're called to be this holy priesthood, set apart for him, not about perfectionism. We do not need to be perfect, which is always a relief. But we're called to be set apart, to live lives of justice, to live lives where we're standing up for those who have no voice, where we're called to live lives where we love our neighbour, where we care for others, where we do care about what's going on in society, where we care for this city of Derby, where we're called to live. And then as we build this altar where we long for this presence of Jesus, the key way we do that is through worship. It's why we worship here on a Sunday morning, where we lift his name up high. It's why we've got Kingdom Come a week on Tuesday. Because as we build with our church this foundation of Jesus, it's not out of duty, but out of devotion. We want Jesus right at the center. So that means, as we all have our part to play, that worship is never a spectator sport. It's not where the band do it, it's where we all do it. And we encourage one another. But also, as I preached a few weeks before Easter on Romans 12, where it says this is what we're called to do, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Paul teaches that living a life of total surrender to God. That is what true worship is. It's about, as we come and we sing songs, but it's also about those decisions we make day in, day out, as we live out our faith. So, it's all about Jesus. We belong and believe, and everyone has a place and a part to play. And as we do these things, we then see transformation and we become a witness for Jesus. We see transformation and we become a witness. Just remind you, verses 9 and 10 say, I'm going to read it actually from the Message version. I think it puts it really well. It says this, but you are the ones chosen by God, chosen for the high calling of priestly work, chosen to be a holy people. What does it matter if I wasn't chosen for a sports team? I'm chosen by God. How much better is that? God's instruments. We're chosen to be a holy people, God's instruments to do his work and speak out for him, to tell others of the night and day difference he made for you. From nothing to something, from rejected to accepted. I love that. We didn't mean for that to come up bigger, but it just has. But there's something. Can you just put that back up again, Soph? Thanks so much. I love that. We go from nothing to something, from rejected to accepted. As we're part of this community, we are transformed by God as we fall more in love with Jesus. It's not, it's now done. It's an ongoing process all our days here on earth. But actually, it doesn't stop with us. As we're transformed, as we are known what it is to be accepted, to be loved, then we help others to find the same. Our stories of transformation become the message we share. Our stories of forgiveness and redemption and acceptance and hope and how God has changed us, they become the stories we share for others. as a community, we long to reflect God's goodness, his love, his faith, that he is the truth to the world. So we gather on a Sunday, we gather in our small groups, or perhaps it's having a coffee with a friend from church, or going for a walk, or meeting another Christian online in some way. And we gather to be filled again with God's presence, so that we can then take that presence out into the world, to our neighbours, to our work colleagues, to someone we meet on the street, to our families, to our friends who don't know him. We gather to get filled up so that we can take it out. I don't know if you've seen any of the recent newspaper articles. It's encouraging to say that there have been some really encouraging articles about what is going on in church. And so I've been reading a few different ones, and I've just chosen one. But if you haven't seen them, go home, Google them. I'd love to read the whole article, but you'd be here for another half an hour. So I've just chosen a few highlights of it. But basically, there have been these different articles written about how there is this rise in church attendance, that there's this rise in spiritual hunger, particularly among Generation Z. And so, like I say, this is just one, but the Independent wrote this article. And actually also just to say that across the Nuerbs network, we are starting to see some of this as well, which is really exciting. But this is what it says in the Independent. It says, so it quotes from the Quiet Revival, and that is a report done by the Bible Society. By contrast, the Quiet Revival report found that Christians reported higher life satisfaction than non-churchgoers, with a greater connection to their community and less stress and anxiety. Interestingly, a major piece of research on teenage well-being conducted by scientists, so this isn't by Christians, by scientists at the University of Oxford and Swansea University last year, found that just 3 elements strongly correlated with better adolescents' mental health: getting enough sleep, regular exercise, and wait for it, attending religious services. These 3 consistently predicted low anxiety, low depression, high well-being, high flourishing, and high agency. And then the reporter later on goes on to write, in an unstable world where uncertainty reigns, perhaps the biggest gift that religion can provide young people is a pathway through the chaos, a light in the dark. There is this recognition that actually, as together, as a church community, we reflect God's heart as we help the younger generations find Jesus, that it changes things, that it transforms people, that it makes a difference. And as I've said, we're starting to see signs of this. And for me, as people turn up exploring faith, and I'm believing for many more people to turn up, and more than believing, praying for it, we want them to find a community of people which reflects God's heart, where we're committed to one another. We want a community where they turn up, which is attractive to be a part of, which does feel different from the rest of the world. We want to show them this love of Jesus. And the Holy Spirit is the one who takes us as these different stones and builds us into something and uses us. But he cultivates it with the choices and the commitments which we make. It's both of us working together. And this takes us truly, I believe, belonging to the church community. It means more than just attending from time to time. It means us together growing God's kingdom. It's not about verbs. It's about us growing God's kingdom. So that actually, as people are becoming more spiritually hungry, and as they're looking for hope and light, that they will find it when they come to churches here and the others across Derby and this nation, that they will find this community of people which is different from others because we're reflecting God's heart. in a moment, we are going to respond by sharing communion together today. And when we take communion, I'm going to invite the worship band to come back up. When we take communion, it's this moment when we come back to Jesus, we come back to the living stone, and we allow his presence again to fill us. It's one of those mysteries how it happens, but something as we take the bread and the wine, and we say again to Jesus, you are who it's all about. And as we do it, we proclaim his death and his resurrection, that he died and that he's alive today. But we take communion not as these isolated pebbles, but together as living stones. We do it together as a community of believers. And so today, as we do it, as we receive communion, as we feed again on Jesus, let's be praying that we will grow together to continue to reflect his heart to people who come along.